Good evening. My name is Bill Hawkins. I'm with the City of Lakeway and a member of the Heritage Committee, and it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight to our presentation on the world of tennis. Thank you for coming out. I know it's a dreary evening, and we're glad that you took the time and made the effort to come and join us. I'd like to introduce a couple of people before we begin. I'd like to first introduce Vicki Taylor. Vicki is the chairman of the Heritage Committee. Vicki? And there are several members of the Heritage Committee here tonight. If you just stand up, I'd like to recognize you. And if you have questions or comments you'd like to share with us, we'd appreciate your input. We have a number of other programs planned, another few that are in flight right now, and I'll speak to those in just a minute. But we would like your feedback. And I'd like to introduce Morgan McMillan, who's the director of the library, and to say thank you to Morgan and all of the members of the team here at the library for their help in sponsoring this series. Tonight is the third in our series of oral history presentations presented here at the library, and we have another one scheduled in the month of March, and I'll talk to that in just a moment. But tonight the topic is the world of tennis, and you see along the wall, if you haven't had a chance to look at some of these posters, these are put up here by the Heritage Committee for the month of February, and it's a history of the clubs of Lakeway, specifically of the world of tennis. And you'll find some interesting history if you have the opportunity to look those over. As I said, the world of tennis is our topic, and there are three people with us tonight. And I'd like to introduce those people who are going to bring this program to you. First, I'd like to introduce a woman who has been in Lakeway maybe 30 years, 25 years?
We've lived here 26.
26 years, okay. She is an excellent tennis player. In fact, she won the very first tournament played at the World of Tennis. Cynthia Weichel. Many of the photographs you had the opportunity to see at the beginning were provided by Cynthia from her archives. Second, I'd like to introduce a gentleman who is the general manager of the World of Tennis today. He's been in Lakeway for 24 years and is the person you know and speak to when you go down to the World of Tennis, and for those of you who are members, Dennis McWilliams. And the third person on our program tonight is a gentleman who is originally from South Africa. He came to the United States and was signed by Lamar Hunt as one of the first 8 players to the World Championship Tennis Tour. They called them the Handsome 8 at that time. In 1979, he started working for ESPN and continues today as a color commentator for tennis on ESPN. He joined or was inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in 2013 and was the first touring professional for the world of tennis. Cliff Drysdale. Not yet, Cliff. Not yet.
As long as you got that part about the handsome 8. Well, I was
I need to go to the next slide here. Before I bring Cliff up, we've got a couple of other things to do. I want to first say that 3 announcements. The next oral history will be on March 19th, also here at the library. The topic will be Lakeway governance. and our speaker will be former Mayor Charles Edwards. So please come in and join us for that. I do want to mention the Heritage Committee has instituted Throwback Thursday. I don't think that was necessarily the original use of the term, but it's a Facebook page for the Heritage Center, and you'll find information about the history of Lakeway on that every Thursday, some new information. Take a photograph of this, and you go to Facebook, do that search, and you'll find some very interesting information. And finally, sign up for the Lakeway, which is a e-magazine that gives you a lot of information about Lakeway, as well as all of the information about the Heritage Center and what we're doing there. So, let me go ahead, one. Thank you. And to introduce our topic tonight, I want to play one of the oral histories, the one on the world of tennis, and this will be a great introduction to the world of tennis. Yes.
I'm Cynthia Weitzel, and I've lived in Lakeway a very long time. I've been playing tennis since I was 9 years old. Dennis, hi there. Good to see you. Looking forward to my lessons.
Good, we're going to spend some time on that forehand today. I am delighted to be meeting Cynthia Weitzel here today. She's been a member here at the club for probably the last 25 or so years. She's an excellent player, been around the game for a long time, and a definite huge ambassador for the tennis program here at the World of Tennis.
We came to Lakeway in 1972 to see what was going on, and there really was not much at all. Lakeway did not have very good access at that point. The roads were very bad, and in the early 70s there was no Lakeway Boulevard to drive straight up. You had a little bit of problem getting there. Lakeway did not have a school district. The police department was strictly Travis County Sheriff's Department. Lake Travis was fairly wild and open at that time. There was maybe one golf course. It was a very small bedroom community, mostly of retired people that had vacation homes here that they would come for the weekend. The World of Tennis was the only attraction in the area of Lakeway. Few people lived here permanently. I think that all started after World of Tennis was built.
Lakeway World of Tennis was built in 1973 and was kind of the mecca for professional tennis at the time.
Lamar Hunt and Al Hill Jr. were the ones that put tennis on the map in this area. They had great vision.
Back in the 70s, all the great players during that time frame played here, from Martina Navratilova to Jimmy Connors, Ilya Nastasi. So a lot of the great players from around the world came to participate here.
They had some great women's tournaments here. Billie Jean King, Chris Everett. Lamar Hunt was the spark that started the World of Tennis. In 1973, they had the opening of the World of Tennis. They had a big 3-day tournament, and Al Hill Jr. and I won the mixed doubles in the Maureen Connolly Grinker tennis tournament. I did play tournament tennis in the old days. Not anymore, not too much anymore. Lakeway is a great place to live.
Okay. I'm not checked out on that machine. Thank you, Morgan. Okay, now, Cliff. Help me welcome Cliff Drysdale.
Cynthia was a terrific tennis player. I'm sure she still is. I haven't seen her play here lately, but She was a terrific tennis player, and Al Hill and Lamar Hunt, the aforementioned, just by the way, used to talk about her all the time. You're a Dallas girl, right, originally?
Fort Worth.
But she was very much part of the tennis scene in the state. And by the way, I take a little umbrage at calling Lamar Hunt instrumental in helping tennis in Texas, because it was a lot deeper than that. He was instrumental in those years, the boom years of tennis, as a matter of fact. But before I get into the things that I want to say, there are a couple of things that I've got to get out of the way. Number one that I want to tell you about is that my dad was a Barnes and Noble type of guy in Central News Agency in South Africa. They sold newspapers and magazines and stuff of that nature. And he would bring home Time and Life magazines, little cut up because they could not be sold. But as a kid, I would go through those Time Life magazines, and on the back cover there was always a Chevy in a suburb, and it looked to me like La La Land, which is the truth of the matter. And all I ever really wanted to do was to come to the United States, from being knee-high to a grasshopper. Which brings me to one of the stories that I want to tell you, and that is that Senator George Mitchell, most of you will be familiar with that name, is a very respected and fine tennis player. Played a lot of tennis with him, ad nauseum, to be honest with you. He gets the ball back and never misses. And it's very annoying for anybody to be playing against him. We've also had numerous political conversations, and among the things that have stayed with me that he told me, just talking about the USA, he said, you know, Cliff, I have been to Ireland, I've done the Irish thing, I try to help out in the Middle East. That was not as successful an endeavor. And he said, you know, these countries that talk about the United States in a derogatory way, he said, it drives me crazy. It drives everybody in this country a little bit nuts when people who have not respected what we have done as a country. And he said, you know, in any of those countries, if you open up just 100 visas, there's going to be a stampede of people from those countries trying to get into the United States, and it is so true. The other general thing that I want to tell you tonight is that from the best days of my life, other than my sweetheart who is outside here, she was a big surprise to me, not on time tonight, so she's standing outside. The fact, other than the 7 delightful years that we have had together, the very best years of my life were at Lakeway. Lamar Hunt invited me all those years ago. 1970 was when I first showed up. We rented a place, 306 Lakeway Drive, and we lived there with my 2 kids, and then moved into the world of tennis when that was built. But anyone says to me, anywhere in the world, where is the greatest, what's the best time of your life? It was those years, my kids 2 and 4 years old, and then we used to throw footballs and stuff at the world of tennis. This community, this town, this is for me the greatest years that I enjoyed, you know, when the kids are relatively young, and we had a lot of things that happened since then, but I want to appreciate the place that you live, because for me, I always come back to it, to be honest. So this is sort of a little bit of history, and I feel like I have to share with you some of the historical things relative to Lakeway, because World of Tennis was not just something that Lamar Hunt or somebody decided, hey, I think I'm going to build a tennis center because it sounds like a good idea. When I first started playing professionally, it was 1962. Played at Wimbledon, the French Championships, the US Open, every so often the Australian Open. The Australian was not in those days what it is now, which has become a major part of the international tennis tour. But there was a small band of professionals in those years who were not allowed to play in those major tournaments. So they sort of went off on their own barnstorming, and they would play against each other and play for money, and they were professionals. I was not, and our group was not. I got to the semi-finals of Wimbledon twice, got to the semi-finals of the French Championships twice, I got to the final of the US Open in singles, or doubles a few times as well. I never made more than $500 for the tournament, ever, in all of that time. In fact, I'll never forget getting a voucher for 2 pairs of tennis shorts at Lillywhite's, downtown London. But I had to find my own way there in order to pick these tennis shorts up. That was my prize for the semi-final of the Great Wimbledon Championships. With that as a backdrop, I'm about to retire. I've said, okay, I've had enough of tennis. There's no money in it. I want to get into business. I want to be an entrepreneur. And then in 1968, along came a fellow by the name of Dave Dixon. He was from New Orleans, rather. He built the Superdome, where he was very much part of building the Superdome. And he went to Lamar and Al Hill, Lamar Hunt and Al Hill, and he said, I want to start this tennis thing because tennis is not properly promoted. There is no real pro tennis to speak of, and I think I can turn this thing into a terrific show. So we're going to call it the Handsome Eight. We're going to put tennis players in colored clothing. And so they went down to the local Kmart and got us some clothes and put this stuff on us. I was one of the original, thank you, Bill, for the Handsome Eight plug. That was very generous of you. That's what they called euphemistically in those days. Actually, it was the Handsome Seven and Tony Roach is how we used it. The saddest part about that was that he was more successful than the other 7 of us with the girls, just by the way. So they start World Championship Tennis. There was another group, as I mentioned to you, that was also playing, that included Rod Laver, Ken Rosewall in that group. Soon Lamar bought also that group, which was called the National Tennis League, and he brought it into the WCT fold. Among the meetings that they must have had, I wasn't part of those meetings, but one of them that they must have had was about taking advantage of the fact that what they had done was start the tennis boom. In those days, as you know, Cynthia, you walk through an airport, every second person was carrying a tennis racket, and you could never get on a tennis court because every court was filled with people. So one of the ways that they decided to take advantage of what they had accomplished was to go and build a tennis facility and they would market it as you said in your piece, Cynthia, quite correctly, they built the world of tennis in the hope that it would be a successful development project, and certainly that it was going to do a lot for tennis. And it did, with all the events that we had. It became internationally recognized. And after their major event in Dallas every year, they would bring up newspaper reporters from all over the world, and the word of Lakeway really spread because of the enormous job that they did. Just look at these people there. And to live those days and to go back to those times is very interesting for me, because you cannot imagine in these days, because what this was the equivalent of getting Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, all on the same court, Novak Djokovic, for example, and some of the great, because when you talk about Navratilova and Chris Evert, they were the creme de la creme of the players. So was Chris Evert, so was John McEnroe, those players. So what they brought here was sort of instant fame. Now again, as Cynthia pointed out in the piece, in those days, It was kind of a place for people from Houston, mainly from Houston, or from Dallas, to come down and enjoy a weekend. It was not what it is today, which is the center of a community of folks that you're all very familiar with, because you're obviously very much a part of it. So as a real estate development, it was not particularly successful, but and remember, it was built also where this was built. There was nothing around it. There was no rough hollow. There were houses on the opposites of Lakeway Drive, but just a few heading toward the airport. But for the most part, it was right out there on its own. Bob Alpert, who I'm sure everybody's familiar with that name now, sadly deceased as well, as are Al and Lamar Hunt. He, at a certain time also, was an avid tennis player, used to come up at weekends, and then finally bought Lakeway and did what he did, which I think was dramatically increase interest in it through, among other things, the world of tennis that he had built. So in some way, the connection between the two of them enabled this to thrive over the years. It is now one of the most thriving and most active tennis clubs that I know anywhere in the country. So nothing has changed in that regard. So that was the boom years of tennis, and that, frankly, is how this world of tennis became so important to me, because I lived right there. I mean, for 12, 14 years of my early years with the kids, that's where we lived. What it did for me personally as well was, at a certain time, when Alan Lamar and WCT were just beginning, well, part of the process for them was the television business. Now, I had never expressed any interest, nor was I ever really particularly interested in getting in front of the camera and doing what I've been doing for all these years now. But they wanted to expose the sport on television. Lamar Hunt, who, by the way, is now in 3 halls of fame: soccer, football, obviously, because it was the American Football League, and tennis. But he said, he had great connections with NBC through the American Football League, the AFL. NFL, AFL, yes, the AFL. So he got a lot of the WCT events on NBC, which in those days, as you remember, there were really only 3 networks, or 4 networks if you included PBS. But that was pretty much the extent of it. So they wanted to do a series of syndicated shows so that they would be on television every week. And they invited me to participate in that as a commentator. So I did, with a guy by the name of Vic Braden. I don't know if anybody in this room remembers that name. But a wonderful memory, also unfortunately deceased. But Vic and I did the first series of syndicated shows, and the plan was for him to be accompanied by John Newcomb at a certain time, and then by Tony Trabert, names of those who are really familiar with the history of tennis as well. That didn't happen because Lamar said, "No, Drysdale's doing a good enough job, let's keep him on." So they did. I did a few syndicated series for them. Then there was this thing called cable television. Now, there was no cable television until this time. 79, 78 is when it started, maybe a little earlier than that, but certainly. And then the sports network called ESPN, Entertainment and Sports Programming Network, is where the name comes from. Entertainment and Sports Programming Network. We're looking for 24-hour sports. Well, everybody looked at that and said, "That's just insane. It's like 24-hour news. It's crazy. Who's going to watch for 24 hours?" As it turned out, they needed programming. And tennis was one of the things that they were able to buy from Lamar at World Championship Tennis. So because I had done these syndicated series of shows with them, they said, well, let's plug him into this ESPN thing as well. I'll never forget Stan Smith, a name that you tennis folks will remember also. He's not just a tennis shoe, he actually won Wimbledon. He asked me during the very first tennis broadcast on ESPN, 1979, I'll never forget, Memphis, Tennessee, USA playing against Argentina. We were on ESPN, and he said, where is this going to? Lamar Hunt's bedroom? Because he thought that Lamar Hunt owned ESPN also. He had no idea really what was going on, but it was typical of those days when people said, you know, this cable thing is never going to amount to a hill of beans. And I remember one of the guys who is in the advertising business was saying the same thing to me. He said, listen, cable's going to be fine until the networks want to take it over, and then they're going to be toast. Well, that's all she wrote. We know that story. Bottom line is, I was on the very first broadcast of ESPN in 1979, and I was on the last broadcast that they just had from Australia in January of this year. That's, what is that, 40 some years? Whatever it is, I'm still there.
Well, that sure didn't last, did it?
They're just afraid to get rid of me now because I'm there for so long. That's a fact of it. And then the whole ESPN thing obviously parlayed to other things. So let me change gears, and I might come back to that thought. But in the early days of the world of tennis, we had weekends where we would invite, where the Houston, the Dallas people would come in, and we'd put on a clinic. We'd have 6 pros, and we'd have 24 people, and we'd all have fun running around. Families would play, we'd have kids sometimes, ladies, the guys, and everybody together. And then we'd get up to the floor now where the exercise equipment is. And that is where we had food on where the weight room is now, and then we had where the elliptical machines are was a bar. It was and it was a great place because, you know, the view up there is absolutely magnificent. So we were talking about this earlier. Dennis says to me, well, where did those guys stay? And I thought about it, and I wondered, where did they stay? Were they at the Lakeway Inn? I don't think so. Were they in the condominiums? Well, maybe, but those were privately owned for the most part. I remembered where they stayed. As you go up the stairs of the world of tennis, we used to check in right there above. You would check in, and where your offices are now, on the left, and go straight, were hotel rooms. Do you remember that? Why did you ask me that question? So that's what that was, and then obviously the shell of the World of Tennis has stayed exactly as it is. It was a beautifully built building with the indoor courts and everything. But that is where the folks stayed in that time when we were having these parties and these weekends and these fun dates. Because in a way, I think Dennis looks at those years and wonders how the heck, he said, I could never do this now. My people can't even get a tennis court, and I'm supposed to give these courts away to people from Houston for the weekend. It's not going to happen. Which I know to be true. So the other interesting thing to me when I was going through the memory banks of this, well, there were 2. On that court that you're looking at there, Jack Nicklaus was here too. By the way, when I showed up here, there was just one golf course, and that was Live Oak. I saw Yopon getting built, and then the Hills, obviously, which I thought was, was a risk, but it turned out to be a wonderful place. at the time, because when you're going to design a facility, you're going to design something like that, you're either going to do one or 2 things. You're just going to break up the land like this and sell it off, or otherwise you're going to put amenities there and make what Lakeway has become. These great golf courses that we have here now, 4 of them, and what you know, in a magnificent tennis facility, which is going to be there forever. So Jack Nicklaus shows up, and we play a turnabout. We played tennis on that court, and then we went and played 9 holes at the Hills. I was playing with Billy Freer, which is another subject that I may or may not be able to get to depending on time, but some of the guys that I brought over here were from South Africa because they were all trying to get here, you know, everybody was. Billy Freer was one of them successful, and then I know there are a lot of you in this room will remember the name Russell Seymour because he was also very much a tennis pro here for a long time as well. So Billy and I played with Jack Nicklaus on that court. We had we had fun. Jack has subsequently become a really good friend of mine, not because of this occasion, but later when I moved to South Florida. I was in Miami for a long time, and he also lives in the South Florida area. We connected, and we have had a tremendous amount of fun just playing golf. He doesn't play that much golf anymore. He'd much rather play tennis because he much prefers tennis. And at his home in West Palm, the West Palm area has got 3 of the most pristine grass tennis courts. Anytime I get a chance to go down there, he's always wanting to play golf, and we play golf in the morning, tennis in the afternoon. The other thing about Jack is that he never bet. At least this is what he tells me. So I said, okay, Jack, we're going to play for $50, right? He said, I do not bet on the golf course. I said, it's silly. What do you mean? You know? And I'm saying to him, you're going to have to put $50 on this thing with me, whether you like it or not. So we started out that way, and this is a story that's actually it was in Golf Digest as sort of an amusing thing, because we played many times subsequent to that, and he would take my $50 and I would, to everybody's amusement, double him on 18. So I would end up losing 2 $50 bills. He flew us to Augusta National golf course in Butch Buckles, a name that some of you will remember also. He was one of the handsome 8. And we flew us up there, and we played golf a couple of days there. And I gave him, I lost like $200, so I gave him the two $100 bills. He said, I only take $50 bills from you, so I'm going to go into the shop and change them for 4 $50 bills. Now, and I'm not kidding, if you go to Jack Nicklaus's house today, you open the cupboard of the kitchen, are lined with my $50 bills. Because he gets so mad with me in the way that I treat him with such disrespect that he thinks it's very funny. So people will go to his house, and they've told me this. They will go to his house and they say, I want to see your US Open, you know, your 16th US Open. He said, no, let me show you this. Here, $50. I first met him on that court, and he has become a great friend, and believe me, I've heard some people say, gee, he's kind of a little ornery. He is the greatest man, greatest sporting professional on earth as far as I'm concerned. So where the handicap parking is now at the World of Tennis, right, used to be grass. And that's where I would take my son Greg, sometimes my daughter Kirsty. We'd go onto the grass, we'd go onto that little spot, or we would play up there on the very highest, very first level up there, you know, because there was the part just off of the tennis court that's somewhat flat. But that was totally flat in those days. So we're playing football this day, this one Sunday afternoon, and so my son, I guess, throws the ball at me, and I'm so excited, and I stretch up and I catch the ball, and I'm heading toward scoring a touchdown, and I run into this a wall of steel, and it turns out to be Houston Oilers quarterback of that era, so the 60s and 70s. Anybody know that name? Dan Pastorini. Yeah, but it was part of the story is not that cute because I injured a rib and I couldn't play for a couple of weeks. I'm telling you, I have a great deal of respect for football players after that because I was what I thought was a premier athlete. I was playing still on the tour at that time, and I run into this wall, which to me was one of my memories. Okay, so just also as an aside, and a thank you to the world of tennis, getting back to the world of tennis. I claim to have helped in the design of this facility. It's a lie, I didn't. By the time I got here, everything was all set, but nobody would ever know that it was a lie except everybody in this room now. However, what I'm getting to is that certain things were done. For example, up there at the in the condominium complex, instead of having this benign tennis court surrounded by windscreens, this was surrounded by a net, by netting, and then I added to that when I was invited to do a real job of designing tennis facilities. I did the same kind of thing with the nets and the columns, and we put hedges around them to make it to be like an honest tennis garden. And I've always thought about the world of tennis because I tell you, Dennis, I think you may be the world's best tennis professional, but you sure have the best canvas to present your sport. And so I'm not sure whether it's you or the canvas that you live on, because it is a magnificent facility. And when you go there, you feel at the world of tennis not only the vigor and the verve of tennis, but what I have subsequently taken to a number of tennis clubs around, or sometimes country clubs around the world, is not just the fact of tennis, but of a lifestyle. Because when you are at the world of tennis, you've got some people walking up the stairs to go work out, you've got some down there that are going to play tennis, you've got others that are going to swim. I'd like to see more of those, but when you think about it, this combination of activities is what sells property. Now, nobody in this room is interested in selling property at this point, but there are a lot of people who are, when they're designing these places, they are thinking about selling property. And I tell them, if you picture your salesperson taking a prospect to a place like the world of tennis, where you see all that activity and all that action, show us different amenities, different things that you can do, and they can picture themselves in that environment. And I have sung that song, and again, my thanks to this world of tennis and my introduction to design from the world of tennis. As it happens, as it ended up, we ended up with a business with my name on it that was managing tennis facilities. We ended up with 35. I just sold the company in July of last year, and so I'm somewhat footloose and fancy-free, but the truth is I still have some obligation to them. But again, for that tentacle, the tentacle of professional tennis, the tentacle of bringing me to this country, the one of the television business, and then the business of managing tennis facilities, all come back in a certain way to this facility, and what it has done for me. So I wanted to share that with you as well. Cynthia, you got a lot of my good stuff on your great narration, talking about all the players who have been here. Those were great times. So one more story, and then I'll beg you to ask some questions so we can round this out, and then we can get the man of the moment, Dennis, to tell you a little bit about how things have turned out in the world of tennis now. But so when I was telling you earlier about my joy, my love for the world of tennis, and my life at that time, and Billy, and to some extent Russell, not so much because he wasn't a golfer, but here was a typical day. Billy Freer and Cliff Drysdale. wake up in the morning, meet over at the World of Tennis, indoor courts available to play in those days. So we would play tennis for a couple of hours, 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. I'd beat his brains out every time we played, which was great because I would hate to have lost him because I was still on the tour those days. I needed to be able to beat Billy. So I would take him down. We'd have a short respite for lunch. We would meet over at Live Oak. We would play golf. I always beat Billy at golf also, as you know. Somebody's going to tell him the story, I know. Then we would take a little break. We'd take a couple of beers maybe, and then we'd go down to the Lakeway Marina. We'd take a boat out, and we would go skiing. So we just called it, we called it the wide world of sports. Then we'd come over to the kids, and it was just, those were the days. Let's see. The only other thing that I have a note here, there are probably others that I had that I forgot to read, but the only other thing is that we had a couple of, when we were talking about these events, there were two events that I always was fascinated by. Number one, for very different reasons. Number one was the oil production folks meeting. Everybody would come here to Lakeway. They would open up the indoor courts. Dennis tells me they do that sometimes still, open the indoor courts in a magnificent, huge arena. And the oil executives would have a meeting. So that was always a big deal, you know, the tie, jacket and all of that, and the ladies and all their sparkly stuff from Dallas and Houston and Fort Worth, you know. And the other one was, whatever happened to these days, Dennis, the days of when the stewardesses, they were called that in those days, the flight attendants.
That's the picture of Jim Kane with the stewardess. That's what was going on.
So that was a weekend. There were like 120 flight attendants would show up, and they would play tennis. Those again were the days of the boob years of tennis. So all I can tell this group, Deanna, would you just try and walk in here, please? Mikey, just bring her in here, please. I just wanted to tell you guys how happy we are. Just carry her in, if you have to. Yeah. This is my wife, Deanna. We have now moved to the area. We're going to shortly be residents of Spicewood, Texas, about 8 minutes and 32 seconds from the World of Tennis. Very close. And if you see anybody running around in the rain and cold and think she's nuts, this is probably her. So just in close, well, let's not close because I'm happy to answer any questions that you like because there's so much that I just sort of touched on. But thank you for letting us back into your great community, and let me tell you that it is unrecognizable from how it used to be. In the days when we came here first, I would have to go from, thanks, we would have to get in the car and drive to Ben White Boulevard to get any kind of groceries. That was as close as things were, and as you said, there was a little 2-lane road at 620. So things have been growing mightily here in those years, unrecognizable from where it used to be.
Well, let's take a few minutes for questions. There's a question over here.
So my wife and I are new residents of the World of Tennis condos. You'll be pleased to know that those near 50-year units are all being remodeled to updated and 80% owner occupied now. So and a 13-year member at tennis. Can we put you on the spot and tell us who the original eight were?
Yeah. Well, why, are you testing my memory?
No, I went to Trinity, and so I knew some of those guys, and I'm just curious how many.
Okay, so let's tell me who. Give me a start. Give me a start. Who knows who the handsome eight were? Roger Taylor, correct. Dennis Ralston, correct. Which Buckholz, correct. That's 4. No. No Marty Reeson. Tony Roach. John Newcomb. Cliff Drysdale. And the last, 2 others from Europe. One from Yugoslavia.
Eli Trier.
No. No, he's from Romania. No, both from Romania. From Yugoslavia, Niki Pilic. And finally, a Frenchman, handsome French boy. But you're not going to get this one. Pierre Barthez. Pierre Barthez. That was the original handsome eight. And yes, I've noticed that how things have been upgraded there at the World of Tennis. They look great, and it's still got to be a terrific lifestyle. Al Jr. lets us stay in his place from time to time just for a little break, and it's still really such a pleasure to be able to just go right outside and play some
What
tennis.
unit did you live in, do you remember?
116.
I have a question. Looking at the future of tennis with John Isner, Kevin Anderson, Ellie Opelka, are you seeing a trend and a dominance of big serving guys? Is the sport changing in terms of physicality? I mean, you still have David Goffin and some of the smaller guys, but it seems like the power tennis is going to prevail. Do you agree with that?
Well, you can, let me ask you, by way of answering the question, would you consider Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer to be power players?
I see them to be tweeners, where they have the mobility and the skill, but they're not hugely dominant. But they're not small guys. I mean, Federer is 6'3", Nadal 6'2", Djokovic is 6'3".
You're making a point that drives me crazy.
That was my intention.
Yeah. I would rather watch grass grow than watch those gentlemen that you mentioned play tennis. It is boring,
Yeah.
it's annoying, and I don't know what the game can do about it. All I know is that I'm pulling for anybody that's playing against those guys. When you have 2 players of that ilk, like there was the semi-final of Wimbledon this year, because of that,
Right.
the All England Club changed the rule, and now they've got finally a tie-break in the last set, albeit at 10-all instead of where it should be at 6, just like every other ATP event. But no, I'm mortified by what's happening.
But even last year's, if I may interject, Atlanta Open, which had Ryan
Harrison
versus John Isner, they're just trading serves, and somebody gets up, that's the end of the game. And
it's the
is
death.
it racket technology too? And
I just can't answer that question. I hate the fact that more people don't somehow bring it up. Okay, so when we're on this subject, I have one other quick. How do you like the squawking and the squealing from Sharapova? And
I put it on mute.
so between those 2 things are the 2 of the things that I would love to see changed in the sport.
You're here.
No more shrieking and no more big serving, and that's the only thing that you have left. Oh, that's so annoying. Yes, sir.
Of the current players, is there one that's sort of your favorite, and not just because of what they do on the court, but behind the scenes, the kind of thing that the public never sees?
Actually, I'm a great fan of Novak Djokovic because I think he's got a great, he's a great personality. He's very articulate. He's a searcher. He's always searching to get better, and he's finding a way to get better. I tend to pull for him all the time, and I think that if he keeps, well, it's a big if, but if he keeps playing as well as he is, he could catch both Federer and Nadal, actually. Federer is a wonderful human being by any definition. So is Rafa Nadal. Andy Murray's days are numbered, I'm afraid, but he's also a sterling guy. He does not have the same charisma that the other 3 have. But I give top marks to Rafa. I don't pull for him personally because He's always too gruff. Federer, very much a huge fan of. I'm just behind the scenes. There's no nicer person than Rafa Nadal. But they're all three, to me, from the same, cut from the same cloth. They're terrific guys. Really. Yes, ma'am.
What kind of tennis surface do you prefer to play on?
Personally, I like the green clay that we have mainly on the East Coast. We've got a lot of it in Dallas, some also in Houston. That's my preferred surface. It's relatively clean and it lets you slide. I think your body lasts a little longer playing on it. So that's my surface.
Second question, how are your kids doing? I used to take care of them.
Oh, did you? My daughter is, I brought her here and all she ever wanted to do, my daughter Kirsty, who is now just closing on 50 years old, all she ever wanted to do was to live in Central Texas on a ranch. She lives very near Lampasas, Texas on 400 acres and has horses. She has a physical disability which is neither here nor there because she lives her life just like she's an able-bodied person. My son moved to Cincinnati and is newly married for the second time.
Sir, do you believe a serve and volleyer player will ever have a comeback?
No.
Because that's how I had learned, and it's
Right.
like they've died.
Yeah, they have. The game needs to mess with itself a little bit to get to where we don't have the big servers dominating, because I think that would be disastrous. Whether you can tweak the court surfaces a little bit to make it a little more difficult for that to work is problematic, though, because they are great athletes, and it's a very difficult balance when you keep the game. Listen, the game is very exciting. You've got Agassi and Sampras, Courier, Chang, and now Connors and McEnroe. That group provided wonderful, and there's no season for tennis that has ever been better than the Djokovic, Federer, Nadal era. It just hasn't been.
Do you think the major tournaments, because they're becoming so difficult to get through, will go to a format where the men only play 3 sets up until, say, the last 16 players are there, so that they don't wear themselves out going through 4 and 5 setters before they get there?
Very good question, whether men's tennis should go to 3 sets. I'm for 3 sets from the first until the last. I don't think that in today's world, honestly, it's very unpopular with the traditionalists in tennis. So unpopular that I don't really say it. I'm sort of waiting for my last year, next year for ESPN. Eventually I'll go on. If you want to know what I really think, it should be 3 sets. Who is the basketball player that had a conversation, the basketball coach that had a conversation with one of the most famous ESPN basketball announcer name? Dick Vitale had a conversation at the US Open with Brad Gilbert on this subject. He said, and I totally agree, he didn't say these words, but who wants to watch 4 hours of 2 people playing any competition, especially in today's world? Now, our group may, because we're a little more mature, but the kids, they're not going to stay there for 4 hours watching. The women play for an hour and a half, 90 minutes or so. It's a perfect amount of time. It's perfect. And they will say, oh, it's going to change the character of the sport, and it's never going. All the great matches were 5-set matches. I said, there's never been a great women's match, ever. They play 3 sets. It's crazy. Tennis should be 3-set competition at the maximum, in my opinion, not even leading to the last 16, maybe to the final, but eventually, no, let's get it over with.
I would come back to that and say, at the end of the match, when you get down to the final few, I think the women should be going 5 sets also.
let me just make this, because I know now we're gonna run out of time, and Dennis is gonna get upset with me. Bill is already getting agitated. So well, let me just answer that question quickly, because women are paid more than equally in tennis today. That's a fact, because they play for less time and they get the same amount of money. And I say that I'm happy for them. I like to see, if I'm going to see a movie, and it's a good movie, and it's a short movie, I'd rather go see that than sit through some long movie that I just hate. So I don't have a problem with the length of time, but I'm just saying that when you boil it down, the guys are busting their gut there for a long time, and they're making the same amount as the ladies. So in a certain way, the ladies are more than equal in tennis. One more question.
Which of the women that you broadcast with give you the hardest time?
John McEnroe. John McEnroe.
No, he's a lot of things, but a woman he is not. I love Mary Jo Fernandez. I love Chris Evert. Pammy Shriver is a really good, close friend of mine. I enjoy working with all three of them. They're top-class people. In fact, the whole group that we have, ESPN, didn't always used to be as comfortable as it is now, and I think it's probably because of my age. They have more respect, I guess, for me for so long, because they're afraid I might keel over at any time. But they treat me so well that it's just become a pleasure to do it. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. We talked a lot about the history and the past of the world of tennis, but I think we'd be remiss without spending just a few minutes about what the future holds for the world of tennis. And to do that, I'm going to invite Dennis to say a few words.
Thank you. No, I don't have the celebrityism that Cliff does. Morgan reminded me, when she came in, the library girl that's here said, I know you from somewhere. I've been the general manager over there for 24 years. She's like, oh, you did the Dancing with the Stars to raise money for the library. I said, yes. And she said, and you had to sell your shirt. I said, yes, I bought that light for $300. So that's my only claim to being a celebrity here in the Lake Travis area. I came here in 1995, and the club was bought out by Club Corp in 1999. Lots of changes have happened since then. Obviously, we continue to grow as more of a club as opposed to a resort opportunity that Cliff so well talked about. So right now we are by far the largest tennis club in the Austin market. We probably have double the participation in our programs that any other club in Austin does. So very proud of that fact, because that was one of the goals that I set when I got here 24 years ago, was to try to bring back the beauty of the facility, try to get back to where we needed to be from a programming standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. I was very fortunate early on in my career. I inherited some of the pros that Cliff mentioned here. Russell Seymour, when I first got here, one of the South Africans, very, very, very gentleman, just a great guy. Betsy Henderson, Dwayne Edberg, were all pros that I got here. But then I hired the very lovely Evie Kerrigan, Evie Morlott at the time. And she and I had the opportunity to work together for over 20 years now to rebuild the programs that we have in place today. And I know Evie is not here. She's probably out squeezing courts trying to get lessons in, because that's the kind of workhorse that she is. But I'd be remiss in not thanking her for all of her time and effort, and it's been a pleasure to grow with her here and there as far as the facility is concerned. So obviously when I got here, the end of the 1990s recession was on. Property values were way down. The club was in receivership and then the Ross Perot Group bought the Hills as well as the clubs. Sold the World of Tennis and the Hills clubs to the group that I worked for at the time, Cobblestone. Cobblestone was eventually bought out by Club Corp, and we've continued on from there. So we've continued to grow and become the facility that we are today. So very, very proud of all the things that we've accomplished. The athletic programs that we have in place now. It's one of the things that I really insisted on when I first got here. The athletic facility that we had at that time was the little studio that's outside the cycling studio. That was our gym. I think Tom Landry and I were the only ones that ever used it. We had a multi-station facility in there, which was held together with baling wire and bubble gum. We had 2 Schwinn Airdyne bikes and a rowing machine. That was our gym. So I insisted that we add that, and they're like, okay, well, if you're going to run it in your building, you're going to be responsible for it. I'm like, okay, I can do that. That's my background. Then we needed to add childcare. I said, okay, we can add childcare, and you're gonna be responsible for it. I know nothing about childcare, I have no kids, but we learned. And then we added the spa. It's gonna be in your building, and you're gonna be responsible for it. Never been to a spa in my life. So I had to learn that. I had a very good friend that ran the Lake Austin Spa, Tracy York, and Tracy invited me down for a few weeks to follow her, and we had a successful spa business for a number of years. Have closed that this past year so we can make room for the new locker room renovations. They are currently under construction. I think you'll be very pleased when they get done, and if they get done, the way the construction goes in the area. So I think probably by summertime, we'll be completely finished with phase 1 and phase 2 of our renovation. If you are not participating in the programs over there, shame on you. Come on over, it's included in your membership for those of you that are members. But the main thing that I have taken and gained from being in this community is just the relationships with the people. I get to be around wonderful people every day. We've lost a number of people. It was so nice to see Kay, Kathy, and some of the other ones that have been here for a long time. We've lost a number of people along the way that were really, really good people, but the relationships that we've developed here are the most important part of being in this community. So I feel very grateful, very blessed for having been here for as long as I have been. Lynn and I feel like we're a part of the community, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. So thank you for my time here. If you have any questions about what's going on at the World of Tennis, I'm there pretty much all day, every day. I'll be there about 4:30 tomorrow morning. Yes, Nancy?
Dennis, there used to be a chair. We used to come up here in the early 80s from Dallas. And there used to be a chair when you walked in the front door by where the sign-in desk, the receptionist desk is right now. And I want to say it was white leather. It might have been vinyl. But it was signed by Chris Everett and Martina and all the pros that used to play up here. And I think it was there when we came back in 2001. Is that ring a bell?
I've never seen that chair.
Really?
Is it at your house? Did you take it home? We have some old pictures and things that were done during that time frame. They're back in Rosemary's office, but I've never seen that chair.
Okay, I remember because Chris Everett was always a huge fan, and she had.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so we've got some stuff over there. So.
But no, I don't have it.
Any other questions? Great. Well, Bill, turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. And I would like to ask you to join me in saying thank you to Cynthia.
Hey, Cynthia!
Thank you, Dennis, and the crew. We'll see you next month on the 19th of March for Lakeway Governance. Thank you and good night.